Well, I know that school started this past week, or is it the morning? It was last week. Greg was involved, and I'm sure Greg McKee's been involved, and Gideon's been involved, and Darren's been involved, and a lot of people involved, and I don't know if that's a reason or not, but it just feels like people are kind of tired this morning. Do I sense that? I mean, everybody kind of walks in. Some Sundays you feel all this energy, and it just feels like we're all kind of tired. And I hope that doesn't stop you from listening, because our lesson is one, I think, of great importance. Almost every week, I've told you this before, Zonell will text me, usually on Thursdays, and just has 2 words, sermon title. And normally within a minute, if I'm where I can, I make up a title in my mind at that moment and send her a title. That's how it usually goes. This week was totally different. This week I started with a title that I thought needed to be dealt with. The hard reality of love. Because last week, you remember we were looking in John chapter 13, and we looked at what some people call the greatest command of Jesus. In John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, a new command I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this will all men know that you are my disciples or my followers, if you love one another. Now, everybody remember that from last week? And then we began to ask these questions. We began to ask the questions like, well, did the apostles who listened to that, the 11 apostles who listened to that, did they get it? And we're almost certain Peter didn't get it from his statement that he makes. But did they ever really get it, and did they ever really understand it? And we looked later in Peter's life when he writes in 2 Peter, and we see, yes, he probably got it. And the person who wrote this was John. And so we went way over to the end of the New Testament in 1 John, and we saw that he wrote about half of that book, it seems, explaining the need to love one another. And he made what I would consider very hard statements, like this one. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or a sister, is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must love their brother or their sister. And I left last week with this question. Can anyone ever really do it? Can any one of us ever really love like that? I liked the lesson last week. And then I didn't like the lesson last week. Because I realize that you can take this subject of love and you can make people feel so guilty. And you can take this subject of love and you can hammer away with it to the point that you make everyone ask that question, can I ever do it? And if I can't do it, and if it says I can't be of God then why don't I just give up? Because here are the hard realities that I want you to think about. And Bert's going to scroll some words on the screen. I'm not sure what the words are. I've forgotten what the order is. But I want you to think about some words with me. So let's start with this one. Abused. I know this morning as I'm talking to you, in this audience alone, and then in the audience that's listening to us or watching us live or will listen to us later, there are people who have been abused. You've been abused by a parent. You've been abused by a friend. You've been abused by a neighbor. And that abuse can be verbal abuse, and it can be physical abuse, and you can be deeply hurt by it. I know that there are people everywhere who have been abused. Let's try another word. I know that there are people in this audience who have been betrayed. Now, am I making anybody nervous? Everybody see the hard realities we're dealing with? You may have been betrayed by a spouse. You may have been betrayed by a business partner. You may have been betrayed by your own siblings, your brothers or your sisters. It's just common that there are those people who do that to us in this life. And then there's another word that comes. You've been lied about, some of you. And you've been lied to. You've been lied about and you've been lied to. And sometimes those lies have come from people you really love. And sometimes those lies have come from people who don't like you at all. And they've really hurt you deeply. And then you have another one. You've been stolen from. There have been people who have broken into your home and they have stolen things out of your home. Susan and I had that happen in Lubbock. Someone literally broke in our home when we were gone and they took things. We don't know who took them. And most things they took, we didn't get back. One thing I did get back, interesting. Months later, a police detective called me and said, "Do you have an LCU ring?" And I said, "Yes, I have an LCU ring. I used to. It got stolen." And he said, "Well, a principal of a school was walking down a hallway, saw a young boy wearing an LCU ring and stopped him and said, 'How'd you get that ring?' And I said, 'How would that principal know to recognize an LCU ring?' And he said, 'Because he wore one too. You want your ring back.' So somehow there was a connection somewhere that, but you've been stolen from. They've broken into your house. They've broken into your barn. Or they stolen money from your business. And it goes on. You've been embarrassed publicly. People have said things about you to other people in a public way wherein you have been belittled, and you still remember it to this day, and you can remember the hurt that comes from it. Everybody understand what I'm saying? And we've been rejected. When we thought things were going really well, someone just says, "I don't want anything to do with you anymore." And it could be your own family. Your own family rejects you. And it could be that your friend that you thought was your best friend rejects you. Burke, are there any more? Oh, yeah. There's a big one. If you've gone to church very long in your life, you know that in every church, every single church, there's something that comes under this title. And what usually happens is there is a disagreement on an opinion, and then the people who disagree act like they don't know anything about Christianity. And they talk ugly about each other, and feelings are hurt, and they last for a long time. So the result of all this is that I have feelings that come into my life that are hard to get rid of. So the feelings look like this: resentment and bitterness, and could it even get to the point of hatred? Now that's the world that we live in. That's the world that we live in. And that's what's been done to us. Everybody kind of got this? You kind of understand what we're saying? And you're asking me, or better than that, you're telling me that I have to love under the conditions that I have just described. How do I do that? How do I love someone who has betrayed me and stolen from me and lied to me and lied about me and rejected me? How do I love like I'm supposed to love? Now, either you're really tired or you're really clued into this and wondering where this is going to go, because I'm getting some really interesting looks from all of you. Am I right that you've been treated like this? Have every one of us, and yet been called to love. So I have a few thoughts about it. Number one is the definition of love. Do we know how to define love? Look in a dictionary. Well, we don't use dictionaries anymore. Google it on your phone. Define the word love. And it's always this vague kind of, I have this feeling. It means a feeling, and it's a feeling of warmth and a feeling of, and then people use the word for everything. They use the word for sex. They use the word for everything they can think of. And I know that there will be some who listen to this and they're going to say, but there are 3 Greek words in the New Testament that are all used for love. And if you understood how it's used here and here and here, and I'm saying, I don't know Greek. I just know I can read the Bible. And I know what he says about love. And so how am I going to get this right? Well, if you look in the New Testament, just like you and I would look in the New Testament, the definition of love seems to be this one word. It's a behavior. And I've said that over and over again. It is a behavior. It's how you choose to act. And love really says, I choose a certain kind of behavior regardless of how you have behaved. Now, this is really interesting. I choose a certain kind of behavior regardless of how you behave, regardless of how you treat me, or regardless of how you have treated me. I choose to have a behavior that's different. That's why Paul, when he writes to a church, and this church is so interesting, and I'm telling you, it's a church of Jesus Christ in Corinth. But if you think America is a bad place for sin right now, it probably doesn't hold a candle, as we say in our phraseology, to Corinth. And they were so messed up. And they were so messed up in immorality, and they were so messed up in the way they fought with each other, and they were so messed up in their jealousy, and they were so messed up in how they treated each other. And Paul says, you know what? The only thing I can tell you to fix this is love. And love is a behavior. You list those behaviors like kindness. It's a behavior you choose regardless of what they do. Now, you got to tack on that last part. You see that? Regardless of what they do. It's a behavior I choose. So I'm not going to get into the behaviors this morning. That's not my purpose. My purpose was to tell you, and I have 2 principles I'm going to give you, but my purpose was to bring to light this morning that it's so easy for someone like me, some speaker, to get up and say, if you don't love, you can't be of God, because God is love. It's so easy for me just to hammer away at that. And yet I walked out last Sunday and I thought, But there are people I don't like as well as I like other people. And there are some people whom I really dislike. And there are some people who have done this and done that, and I don't like what they've done. I don't like how they treated my dad. I don't like how they... You see where I'm going? There are some things I don't like. So how does Ken Jones reconcile all this? That's why I started with a title. And that's why this may not be much of a lesson this morning. But I will tell you two principles that I'm wondering about. Here's the first. Can love behavior, that's patience, and that's kindness, and that's not being rude, and that's not retaliation, and that's, we're going to get into some of those words. But can love behavior ever become a feeling? Can it ever turn into a feeling where I change how I feel about this one I've not liked at all who has hurt me? Now, I think it can, because if you could remember back to when you dated the person you're currently married to, when you were dating, were you not on your best behavior? Have you ever heard the story? After I got married, I realized I didn't know the person I married. Have you ever heard that? I got married and I found out they're different than they acted like. So when I'm dating, I'm trying to swoon you. I'm trying to do everything I can to make you be impressed by me. And then over time, maybe it's a few months and maybe it's a year or so, we decide we just can't live without each other. We like how we behave together and we're a perfect match, and we get married. And we have these feelings. And so I wonder, with those people with whom I've had a problem for a long time, if I just behave the way I'm supposed to behave in kindness and not being rude and not talking ugly about them, if someday I could come to really like them or have feelings that are different than I currently have. Is that possible? I don't know. But here's the next one and the most important one. Can love behavior ever become a feeling? There's a word left out there. Can love behavior never become a feeling and still be love? Never become a feeling and still be love. What if you and I never really like each other? What if Rob and I just decide we don't really like each other? Can we still behave in a way that God would call it love? Am I making sense at all? What if I keep acting in love and you still drive me crazy? I still feel the hurt, I still feel the pain, and I still say, you betrayed me. I have an interesting question for you. Do you think that Jesus felt the same way about Judas as he did about the writer of this material, John? John will refer to himself as the one Jesus loved. He will refer to himself often and say, I'm the one Jesus loved. And we know that Jesus would take Peter and James and John with him often and leave the others behind. Could it be, we say, well, but Jesus is God and Jesus loves everyone, and yes, he does. But he's a human being too. And as he would walk through the days, he knew what Judas was going to do. He didn't want Judas to do it, But he knew that Judas was a greedy thief. And he knew that Judas kept taking money out of that bag he wasn't supposed to take. And yet on the night that Jesus said, you've got to love one another, he went from person to person to person and washed their feet. When it came to Judas, did he skip him? No. He went ahead and acted the way he knew he should act, regardless of what he was like or what he was going to do. Now that phrase stuck it, that soak in. He went ahead and acted like he knew he should act, even though he knew what this guy was going to do. I mean, I would have probably cracked his knuckles of his toes, or I would have probably taken really hot water and poured it on his feet, or I don't know what I would have done, but I just know how Ken acts with those people that have hurt him. Or what about this? They've hurt someone I love. They hurt someone I love. They did something really badly to Suze. They did something really badly to one of my grandchildren. I mean, a young man walks into our house with Mackenzie one time. And I said, something you need to know. I carry guns. And you ever mistreat her? He didn't know whether I was kidding or not. I didn't know whether I was kidding or not. You hurt someone I love, I got a problem. Am I making any sense at all? This is a struggle that will be with me for all of my life. And I've got to learn somehow this one principle. If I act in the behaviors of love, it may be that Rob and I actually like each other someday. And we have feelings for each other someday. But even if we don't, is my acting right and his acting right what God is looking for? Am I making any sense? I mean, I joke about Ronita. I don't think she likes me. But we get along really well. I mean, I treat her wonderfully. I'm hoping she'll start treating me really well. That's a joke. I mean, Ronnie and I talked early this morning even. I mean, I think I've made my point, haven't I? I know there are wounded people walking around everywhere. And you know how they got wounded? By other people. By mom, by dad, by brother, by sister, by spouse, by business partner, by kids at school. And yet, I have to learn to act like I'm supposed to act, regardless of who they are, what they've done. I think that's what Jesus did. So we're here this morning to remember Jesus. Let's take our Lord's Supper remembering that he is the supreme example of everything that we're supposed to be. And he died for us, and it was a horrible death, but he died for us to make life possible for us in such a way that it could be a good life and it can be an eternal life.